try not to talk too quickly. I get excited, got a lot to share. But if you have any questions about any of the initiatives that I'm going to talk about, so I'm going to touch on, just kind of the history in the secondary program, our efforts for the statewide articulation agreement, and then moving into the BACE. But if you want any detailed information, I'm happy to share that with you. I've also given some materials to Amrita to share, a PDF of the presentation, and some other things that I think could be helpful for you. So just moving forward then, so just quick, brief history. So our center was put in place, about 15 or so years ago by the state, really with the intention of helping us diversify our economy. So Florida invested heavily in building the bioscience industry so that we weren't so overly dependent on tourism and agriculture. And so the center was put in place really with two missions. One was a contract manufacturing facility to make CGMP compliant materials for clinical trials, and that was Florida Biologics. And then Bioutility was tasked with the mission for developing the workforce talent to support the growth of the industry. And we approached that really from two angles. One was with funding from the umbrella over our workforce boards, so Career Source Florida. And with that, our goal was, and actually continues to be, to interface with the industry and develop certificate short courses to address their immediate training needs. And of course, that changes over time. But that's something that we continue to do when we, offer these trainings, either virtually, historically in person, et cetera. But I really want to focus on this other initiative, which was with the National Science Foundation, and that was to develop a secondary program in industrial biotechnology. And as you can imagine, as we were at the table with industry and educators, let me back up just a second. What was nice is that we were doing this really at the same time as we were working with our industry partners. We had conducted industry focus groups, so there was a lot of industry participation in the development of this secondary program. And so as we were developing it, the conversation became, who's the target audience? Because when you think of biotechnology, it's typically, a high-level interdisciplinary complex concepts in science. And the argument was that this should be an academic, maybe even an honors, high-level academic type program. But then we had another group saying, but we can teach these students tangible skill sets that are valuable to the industry and really make them employable straight out of these high school programs. And we ended up developing the framework for both, a framework for an academic program in industrial biotech, and then a CTE program, also in industrial biotech. We sent both frameworks to the state and hoping that we would just get 2 approvals back. Well, what they ended up doing was merging these, and it was one of Florida's first hybrid academic CTE programs. And the knee-jerk reaction, of course, was, oh my gosh, what have you done? I kind of say it's very similar to that old Reese's peanut butter, but, cup commercial. You got chocolate in my peanut butter. You got peanut butter in my chocolate, right? But then it turned into something great. And, so it's now been, so it's, approved by the state in 2006. And, we launched it into 2 of our, the schools that were participating in the grant. And then it just took off across the state. And so, the beauty of it, of course, is that it really is tying into that goal that we all have, that, we're preparing students for career, continued education, right, professional growth, and so that's this high school program. And so here's an overview of that program, and we can go into more discussions about this as well, but essentially it was created as a 3-year sequence. We're in the first year, kind of your basics of working in a research or an industrial type setting. So, right, the safety and just understanding, right, how to make the buffers, the basic chemistry that goes along with that. Then moving into, right, working with the microorganisms and manipulating DNA, sterile techniques. So really, that is the focus of that first year. And then in the second year, moving more into the protein expression. So transforming cells, and then collecting the product, and then, right, all the assays associated with that. And, so we do ELISA, the polyacrylamide gels, right, PCR. And, the interesting thing is that all these assays in this second year, and I think they're very common to most biotech programs, is, these are techniques that we use in research, but part of this effort is that paradigm shift. How would you use those same techniques as a quality control technician? And so, what we can talk about the careers in a little bit as well. And then in the third year, originally, way back then, we were thinking that Florida would become regionally specialized in different applications of the biotech industry. That ended up not happening. We get a kind of a smattering of everything all over the place. But, so it's really directed more towards independent study, more either teacher-directed projects or student-directed projects. And so after this secondary program launched, we then received funding from the U.S. Department of Education through Florida's Department of Education. And this was during, the rigorous programs of study. So this was one of the first grants awarded under the Rigorous Program of Study Initiative. Back then it was still called OVE. They were still using the vocational education acronym. But this was really that push to change the perception of vocational education, right? When we really switched into that whole idea of career and technical education, that these aren't dead-end jobs, your traditional vocational education programs, right? These are high growth, right, challenging careers. And so, so we received funding from them to develop a statewide articulation agreement so that students that were successfully completing our secondary program in industrial biotech could articulate into any of our two-year degree programs. And, this really involved a concerted effort then of working with, at the time we had community college in Florida. Since then, they've all transitioned, or most of them, to state college programs. But this again involved working with the post-secondary partners and the industry to make sure that these are industry-defined standards in the secondary programs that are being articulated into the post-secondary programs. And so part of that initiative, and these were all deliverables that were built into the grant, included just doing an industry survey again and breaking out the industry by their products, their classifications. And as you can see, and this is old data, but this is what we were working from at the time, and we continue to work with this as we're updating. But again, we got that broad distribution of industry applications. And what I love about this is, and this is what I love about the secondary and the secondary, post-secondary and secondary programs in biotech, is that there's so many directions the students can go, right? They're not locked into any one application of the biosciences. And I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here. But keeping in mind that when you're looking at these prioritized positions, they're going to change as the industry matures. So back then, the prioritized positions were really more in your research and development areas, the testing areas, because our companies were very young. They're still just developing, right? The techniques and the processes. They hadn't had a product yet approved by the FDA to then go into full manufacturing mode. But as the industry is maturing, now we're seeing more demand for manufacturing technicians and people that are working in that area as well. And so for this articulation agreement then, like I mentioned, we are working together with the community colleges. And so it really was an effort of just sitting down and doing alignment of the academic and the performance standards. And we did this by just going over all the syllabi for the programs. And at the time we were working with, I think there were 5 community colleges that were involved with this. And so going through the syllabi, course descriptions, looking at, the information on our state code, the numbering system within Florida, and then just interfacing with the instructors of these courses. And, what was settled on, and there actually is a very nice alignment, was that the secondary program really covers the topics that are in our post-secondary Introduction to Biotechnology and the corresponding methods courses. And so that's what we settled on with that.
Yep.
Because this was part of that rigorous program of study effort, they also wanted us to look at any other potential courses that could be folded into an articulation or additional credit. And so we did look at, some of the maths and those things. They also wanted us to think about, what courses would we, suggest as prerequisites. So biology, chemistry are, core foundations behind this. Grade requirements, and we settled on a C, 2.5 GPA. And then also part of this grant then was to develop a rubric for a comprehensive exam. And that also included the practical skills, so that because it was a statewide articulation, we needed to make sure that there was that baseline of knowledge and skills that was articulated into these programs. And then also exploring a mechanism for transferring that credit. And so we're working on all this, and you can probably see where I'm going with this, is that Florida, and this was back in 2008, passed legislation called the Career and Professional Education Act. And, this was, sorry?
I had a quick question about the previous slide. Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
So when you said you collaborated with 5 colleges, so all the 5 community colleges from the state of Florida?
Right.
Yeah, and of course the Gainesville is next to you, right? Gainesville Community College.
So the University of Florida is in Gainesville. Our facility is actually in Alachua, which is one of the biotech in Florida. So it's about 10 miles north of Gainesville.
Yep.
The college is the community college that was most local that we worked with. They actually, their facility is also in Alachua.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I was at University of Florida as a postdoc. So I know Gainesville is right next to, community college is right next to you guys. But you worked throughout the state and made sure that everyone was aligned.
Oh, yeah. And it really requires the buy-in, right? Because
of course,
on the plus side, this is, kind of a pipeline of students into the programs. And I think that and just to be blunt, I think there was some concern that, the high school program would actually compete, with the graduates of the post-secondary programs. Mm-hmm. And, but there's a distinction but that we got past that. So,
Can you speak a little bit more to that part? Like, so what made that not a problem?
Yeah. And I was also wondering, did you not involve high schools in that at all? Or?
So it was. So we had a partnership. So this actually included a whole consortium of the high school teachers, and primarily the ones that had been involved in that NSF effort, because, they can speak directly to what their students are accomplishing in the secondary programs. And so these include, this was roundtable meetings that included secondary instructors, post-secondary, as well as industry representatives. And, coming back to, there was one college in particular where they brought up this idea of, potential competition between, completers. And, I'm not gonna, it's something that I think had to be delicately addressed, because I think people that teach and rightfully so, these high school programs are highly rigorous, and these students are elbow deep in it, for, 2 to 3 years or more. And, they do come out with, some, like I said, marketable skill sets. But I do think that when somebody presents with an application for a position, the hiring managers are going to look differently at a college graduate, right, or a 2-year degree than a high school graduate. And so at the end of the day, I think it really is a win-win. And maybe Susan can speak more to that. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Susan, on.
So actually I'm in the Orlando area, and we have much more of the Project Lead the Way biomedical programs as opposed to the technical program that Tammy developed. But still, at the end of the day, those students take the BACE exam at the end of the Project Lead the Way biomedical program. And I've only had a couple of them come through my program, and they have been amazing and wonderful. The ones that have completed the Project Lead the Way program. But and I've talked to many of the high school teachers who run the biomedical programs, and I'm asking, like, why don't I get more of your students coming through my program? And they were saying that most of the students that are in these advanced programs like this that are very rigorous, those are the students that are going to go straight to your four-year university. And so they're not considering really going to your college as their pathway.
And we see that across the country, right? That's absolutely true. And it goes back to, what I was saying too about the rigor of these programs, that, the majority of the students are looking at post-secondary at some level, and, but multiple opportunities. So
one thing I was going to say is that the students, the couple of students that we have had who have come through, they were able to complete their AS degree in essentially one academic year. And so, they get their AS degree. And I was asking also, how does what we're doing in our program, because you've passed the BACE exam, you've been through, the Project Lead the Way program, how are you learning more in our AS degree program versus what you learned in the high school program? And they essentially said the skills are similar, but we go into a lot more depth than what they do. So for example, they might run one polyacrylamide gel or do one PCR, but whereas, we dig in a little bit deeper to these skills and do more of them and more variations on them.
Yeah, and I'll show some graphs too of how these students are performing on the BACE, kind of comparing the secondary and post-secondary outcomes. But before we even get to the BACE, let me just finish up with the the statewide articulation agreement, because it really was then, in the midst of this effort that Florida did pass this legislation, the CAPE Act. And the whole intent behind this act was to drive those academic industry partnerships, again, recognizing that we're transitioning from traditional vocational education and really, right, integrating these higher level career opportunities into our programs. And one of the key components of the CAPE Act was that students had to have the opportunity to earn an industry recognized credential. And so because we were working already so closely with the academic programs as well as the industry, the Department of Education, Florida's Department of Education, came back to us and said, we need you to add to these deliverables the development of an industry recognized credential. And so that was really what drove then the creation of the Biotechnician Assistant Credentialing exam. And so it is based on knowledge and skill sets that have been identified by the industry as being valuable in these technician level positions. And, they were quite empathetic that, not only did they need to understand the theory behind, right, the applications of the science that they're learning of these knowledge sets, but they also had to demonstrate that they had that practical, right, know-how, the good hands, as they call it, and that they can actually, work in these environments. And so we worked with our industry organization, Bio Florida. So Bio is the international organization that represents the bioscience industry. And pretty much every state has then its own arm of the bio organization. And so in our case, it was Bio Florida. And so we set out and developed this rubric based on their standards. And then they reviewed, the corresponding rubric for relevancy, right, accuracy, the difficulty level. And that was approved by our Board of Education, and as well as our workforce board, which oversees these industry credentials as well. And I did include as a handout, I think that can be probably sent out with you. It's also on our website. This is, a big picture overview of, the applied knowledge that the students really, or that BACE credential earners are going to be addressing in the exam. So when you look at these topics, it's really in the context, right, of using them, understanding. So, right, when you look at the biochemistry or the chemistry, right, it ties into, making solutions, understanding why we're doing it a certain way, why enzymes are important, in reactions and how that works. So this is provided as a handout to you, and then this is an overview of the practical exam subjects. And so we've got applied math, your biotech skills, the equipment that you're going to be using, in a QC or a research type environment, and then your foundational workplace skills, safety and behavior. And so again, I can't get too deep in that, but the distribution of these topics are set by our advisory board. And so they really dictate the weight that is applied to each, as well as the difficulty level. And, so it's very heavy on biotech skills, and then also the applications of those skills. You'll see that purplish 13%, and that's the applied math. And the reason I have that red arrow there is because this is something that is important to the industry, right? That their employees can make solutions. They can do serial dilutions, basic dilutions, right? Calculate molarity, percent volume. But this is where students struggle the most on the exam. And when you look at that 13%, and I'm going to talk about pass rates, et cetera, but this is what really drives the pass rate down. And so,
may I ask a question?
Sure.
Applied math, is it do the math for the dilution and perform the dilution, or is it paper? Or could you just say a tiny bit more about what the demonstration of skills is?
Yeah, so, this is built into the practical exam. And so, if it's a weight volume, it very well could be calculations and then, performing that metric, or being able to accurately describe how that should be conducted. So if you're going to weigh out the material, how do you then bring it to volume, right? So these correct techniques for making the correct percent solutions. I will say that we have also worked very closely with our advisory board, who plays, again, a heavy role in not only in this topic distribution, but every year when we create that New Year's version of the exam, they participate in the review of the individual items. And what we also have them do is do the same thing for a practice exam. So we have a very, well-developed, actually 2 versions of a practice exam that are also developed with our advisory board. And there's no charge, if you've, registered for the exam, there's no charge to make use of this practice exam. Students get immediate feedback, teachers get feedback from this exam. And we've added additional modules on practicing these math applications. And so it's a great tool to use. And it also gives you a sense of the difficulty level of the exam. So I would encourage you to make use of that. If you register as a test site, you do have free access to that exam. This is in no way a marketing spiel, but it is, I think, a very useful tool.
So I asked in the chat, I thought I'll just ask you, is it, do you get these questions from other people who outside Florida even, like they want to do a BACE exam?
Yeah.
People want to do a BACE exam, even if their community college is not administering the exam, so that they can be certified in a way?
So, like I said, so individuals can register to sit for the exam. And one thing I'm going to say right now is that, due to COVID, so COVID hit right when, the schools were preparing to administer the BACE. And so we had an emergency meeting with our board. And actually, let me jump ahead just a little, because going to mention, I think it's the next slide. So we do have a national advisory board. This has grown so beyond Florida that it's really important that we have national representation from the full spectrum of your small companies to your very large established companies, right? Different roles within those organizations. So we did have a meeting with the board because, students had been preparing to sit for this exam, and they granted us approval to administer the full exam virtually. And that approval is now through July 15th of 2021. And it's still proctored. We use a system called Honor Lock. And students or any individual now can sit for this exam from home and take the full exam virtually. The other thing that we did is we hired a third party to do a psychometric study because we want to make sure that the outcomes are identical from the traditional manner in which we had administered this exam in the past. And they gave us the results actually about 2 weeks ago, and the difference in exam security, right, anything that would be out of the ordinary. And then they also did an alignment with the questions and how students were performing, and they didn't see a difference in difficulty level or outcome performance, with the actual items, these cells. For the development of each year's exam, we hire professional item writers. These are people in the industry with industry experience. Again, making absolutely certain that these are questions, these are topics, right, that are representative of these industry needs. And so just, kind of along those lines then is what began to happen was as other states passed similar legislation, or again, they were growing the bioscience industry, they approached us about using this exam. And, my response has always been, well, of course, anybody can sit for this exam, but at the end of the day, the value to the student or the credential earner and the state and the industry is that there's that industry buy-in, right? I would lose sleep at night thinking that somebody was sitting for this exam and, it had no merit with their local or state industry. And, and so most states now, and, early on this wasn't the case, but most states now, when they go through a formal adoption process, is they require, right, input from the industry. And usually this starts, very easily, not, this effort, but at the local level, right, where a school just works with their own advisory board or their industry partners. And this is something that, we're happy to assist with, if it maybe providing a link for them to actually sit and maybe go through the practice exam so they can see the rigor that's built into that. Any materials we can provide, to show them that this really is a credential that's geared towards the industry. But since that time now, the credential has been formally adopted by several states. And so those are highlighted in orange. So we have Arizona, Arkansas, District of Columbia, Maryland, of course, and Missouri recently came on board. The other states are, either actively engaged in, trying to work with the stakeholders for that formal adoption, or they're piloting in different districts. And so, interestingly, Nigeria has formally adopted it, and it's also been administered in Brazil. So like I mentioned, we do now have a national advisory board that's been in place now for quite a while. At any point, if somebody has somebody they would like to recommend as, to receive an invitation to this board, we would be happy to consider that, because I think the more broad representation we can get, the better, especially, throughout the country. I'm just going to cut a couple nuts and bolts because these were things that, you had mentioned, Amrita, that instructors might be interested in. I think you're probably already all familiar with it, though, is, so in terms of the textbook, at the time when we developed that high school program back in 2006, this was really the only text that was out there. And, it continues to be used. I've written down that the chapters, that this was, some of the teacher agreement, that this kind of fit best with the outline of Florida's framework. I will mention too that I sent Amrita, I sent you the framework, so that if you want to share that with everybody, please do so. So it's a good text. I think it covers, you know, the foundational ideas, but I think was it Avi that mentioned this, that Biorad a couple years ago, when they put out the second edition of their textbook, they deliberately aligned it with the BACE. And so it really incorporates more of that industry perspective. And so if it's not something you're familiar with, or I think it's something that, you know, I think the students, again, it's a real mind shift, because they're not necessarily told about these careers in the industry. If anything, it's the dark side, right? You don't want to go there. These are great high growth careers. And so in any case, this Biorad text covers a lot of that. I think, you know, maybe a combination of the textbooks might be the best way to go. But that is that. And, you know, we touched on this too. So several years ago, Project Lead the Way did a gap analysis, and Susan brought this up too. You know, because they wanted to start using the BACE in their, you know, for their students. And so they conducted this analysis, and, you know, they found a significant, right, more than significant agreement between the BACE framework and their own programs. And so they've been using this extensively throughout the country as well. And so that brings me to the pass rate. So it is not an easy exam. You know, it's not everybody's going to get an award with this one, because we really are separating the cream from the crop. And, you know, we look at the outcomes, and, yeah, you'd see, right, similar outcomes between your traditional biotech programs, which are the gray bars, and then the Project Lead the Way programs, which are the orange bar. And then the green bar are the post-secondary programs. And, you know, they're performing much better. And it's a combination of added maturity, extra experience, as Susan alluded to. And then the blue bar are teachers. And in Florida, I don't think this is true throughout the country, but with Florida, any teacher that teaches a course that leads to an industry recognized credential, they need to actually have earned the credential themselves. And so they sit for the exam. We have other teachers, you know, that participate in our summer programs that sit for the exam. I will say now that the exam is fully available in a virtual format, that this is really a good time as an instructor to sit for the exam, because it alleviates the need of finding a testing site. You know, and then once you sat for the exam, and if you want to then register your institution or school, you know, as a test site, then we have an easy process for that. We really try to make it as low effort as we can. We know you're very busy. And so, like I said, Stephanie and Lisa are, you know, participating in this as well. And we're anytime, even not today, right? We're happy to help you with that. Here's a breakdown of outcomes just on the topics. And again, you can see, right, kind of a similar performance. Interesting, you know, where, you know, Project Lead the Way is actually outscoring the traditional biotech programs in some areas. You know, general topics in biotech, right? They're a little bit higher there. Lab skills and applications. You know, but across the board, I think it's a pretty even outcome. And again, the post-secondary programs are scoring slightly higher on those topics. But what I want you to see here, and this is what I alluded to earlier, is that applied math section. You know, overall, the candidates are doing well on all these topics. And where we see, right, the big drop is in that applied math. And so, again, the added practice, and it's something that just, you know, you have to practice it so it just becomes second nature. You know, I used to work in industry, and I could just do dilutions and calculations, you know, like that. Now that I've been out of it for a while, if you were to ask me to calculate, you know, how do you make a 10 millimolar solution of sodium chloride, you know, I'd think, shoot, I got to stop and think about that. So,
amazing, Tammy, to learn that PLTW and non-PLTW doesn't have so much difference, because I know some of our teachers are teaching PLTW, and I think at least Sean asked, like, is there a difference? Like, what should we do? Should we change? Looks like it's pretty uniform, and that's kind of great stats to know.
Yeah. So I presented at, I participate in their summits, and, the teachers that are really interested in, administering this. I think there are some areas. So again, that math, that's what I tell them all, practice that math. I think the industry career piece, just understanding like what's the difference between quality control and quality assurance. Some of those aren't necessarily built into the Project Lead the Way curricula, but you do just either having that biorad text as a resource in the class, or, bringing in guest speakers to talk about these roles in the industry, I think helps bridge that gap. But otherwise, I really don't see anything significantly different. And so in terms of employment, so like we said, most of these students are looking at post-secondary education. We are now, it's a challenge tracking, right, these students, especially when they leave high school. But we have different ways now of staying connected with them, through LinkedIn, or just trying to chase them down. We have a credential learner newsletter. We do a featured credential earner every month on our website. So just whatever we can to keep them engaged and keep them communicating with us. But, when I look at, the companies that have hired credential earners, I think what I really like is, again, you see that diversity of where they can go, with this background and the credential, so whether it's the diagnostics industry, the biopharmaceutical industry, we've got Boehringer Ingelheim, Applied Genetic Technologies Corporation, a gene therapy company, Meru Nutrisciences for dietary supplements, Monsanto, Syngenta for the agricultural, right, applications, Novabone, RTI Surgical, they process human long bones to make orthopedic devices. So just this full spectrum of opportunities.
May I ask a question about that?
Sure.
I have not seen BACE listed in a job ad at this time. What are they valuing it as?
Exactly. So, so that's something now that, that our board, our advisory board is working on, and also just direct communications now. So, because you're absolutely right. That's what we want to see, where in a position description, they include, right, they're going to give preference to, or preferred qualification is the BACE credential. And so even though that's not in these job descriptions right now, when you talk to the industry and the hiring managers or the decision makers, just the fact, right? It wasn't listed, but just the fact this is something that's on the student's resume makes a difference. But I 100% agree that, this is something that, again, the whole concept of credentialing or a credential is very new to the bioscience industry. You think of these other, right, industry sectors, and it's not so novel, but, historically the bioscience industry, right, the bachelor's degree was really the entry point for even these very low level technician positions. And what you find is, right, a huge degree of turnover, because not only are bachelor's degrees not necessarily even prepared for this work and know what it is that they need to do, but their expectation of where they are in the totem pole doesn't necessarily align with the job itself. And so I really think that the industry is coming around to recognizing that skills gap, knowledge gap, and addressing that. But it's communication. It's something that I'm working on. I think I know, right? Like, this is something that we're just.
And I can echo that as well. I'm sorry, I turned my video off because I was having audio issues, so sometimes that seems to help. So I've had a few students who are getting biomedical sciences degree at University of Central Florida, which is our 4-year college here. But even many of those degree classes in the sciences don't have labs. So I have students who are in my program to get the lab skills at the same time, because they know that they want to go work in a lab. But when they're getting their bachelor's degree, many of them are theory classes. So for example, they have a biotechnology methods class that doesn't have a lab. So it's like, how is this even possible that you have a biotech methods class and there's no lab associated with it? And the same thing, the intro to biotechnology class doesn't have a lab. So I see, it's not all of my students, but I have a significant percentage. I would say about, 10 to 20% of my students are also getting their bachelor's degree at the same time, but now they're coming to my program so they can get the lab skills, so they're prepared to go work in the lab on day one when they get hired. Another thing that I have seen from my students who've graduated is that, they apply for a job where it says, high school or AS degree, but then when they go into the interview and they list all the skills and all the techniques that they can perform, they're like, well, you're really much better suited for the next job up, but it says you have to have a bachelor's degree. And so I think that is a problem that I've heard echoed around the country, that it's not just in the state of Florida, that a lot of people have that same issue with their AS degree completers are in many ways better prepared, but the minimum job description, like Tammy said, is you need a bachelor's degree for these entry-level positions, when our students with an AS degree are really much better prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And so these are positions that we have, BACE credentialers have gone into. And again, it's really spanning the opportunities within the industry. And, I think the nice thing is there's less of a glass ceiling. Once you're in and you've got a job in the industry, your opportunities for growth, if you're willing to work beyond your job description and show the aptitude for the work, they really want to grow you and keep you, because, this is specialized work, proprietary work. And if they can grow candidates within rather than, outside searches, it's really to their advantage. And so, again, just a full variety of where they've gone. The students that are continuing into post-secondary programs are snapped up for undergraduate research positions, as well as internship opportunities. And this is, like I had mentioned before, the heavy lift has been, not just, really making students aware of these opportunities. And, if at any point, if it's helpful, I'm happy to talk about what these different jobs are. Anything that we can do, beyond this presentation, because I know a lot of it was just kind of the high level overview, but if you want any other information about how we did the articulation agreement, or, a deeper dive into anything we've talked about with the BACE, we can certainly do that. I will add that we do offer professional development. The Industrial Biotechnology Teacher Experience was actually developed and approved by our state, because when we created that hybrid program in biotech, it was impossible to find anybody with industry experience as well as the teaching qualifications to teach that course. And so the Industrial Biotech Teacher Experience, we bring teachers in, it's a 2-week program, and it's just an immersive, here we're going to go through all the techniques, that you're probably already somewhat familiar with, but in the context of working in the industry. So if we're doing a transformation and a purification, we're doing it in the context of a manufacturing function. And then how do we measure the purity of the protein